In every MMA YouTuber's career, there comes a time when he runs out of video ideas. And that time is not now for me, at least, because I am working on a bigger project right now. However, I have been asked quite a bit to produce some more formulaic videos. Videos that, someone like Lucas Tracy might make, or Bedtime MMA might make. So, without further ado, here's my personal list ranking all of the UFC champions from least to most favorite, all based on my own personal preferences. And if you agree or disagree with any of my choices, please comment them down below. Alright, I did not clickbait you with the thumbnail because I have Khamzat Chimaev as my least favorite, and personally, I think objectively worst UFC champion right now. Because I have to ask this, Khamzat Chimaev, where the hell are you? Like, where are you, okay? Like, this guy's title reign is exactly what we worried it would turn out to be, okay? Because he fought for the belt, and he won the belt back in August of 2025. It is now February of 2026. 6 months have already passed, and there's no word on even a scheduled title defense, okay? And since it's Ramadan now, we can't expect an announcement probably for the next 2 to 3 months. Because Chimaev isn't going to do a training camp during Ramadan, right? And look, I understand, that's his religion, and that's important to him. But the thing is, he's had 6 months to defend that belt already, and there's been nothing. Absolutely nothing. And since I'm recording this video during the fight week for Strickland versus Hernandez, if Hernandez wins that fight, we're going to have 2 deserving #1 contenders in Nasruddin Imavov and Anthony Hernandez just waiting for him, okay? When, considering that Chimaev won the belt back in August and barely took any damage in that fight against Dricus because he laid on Dricus for 5 rounds, he could have already fought Imavov. And look, Khamzat, he's already trying to move up to light heavyweight by calling out Alex Pereira, right? I don't think anybody would complain if Khamzat beat Imavov, beat Hernandez, and then decided to move up. I don't think anybody would complain if he did that, right? But instead, he's just sitting out for basically an entire year, doing nothing besides whining on Twitter about how Alex Pereira is ducking him and how he doesn't want to fight Imavov because of political reasons or religious reasons. Like, shut up and fight Imavov. Okay, shut up and do it. And here's the thing though, even if you were to fight Imavov, I'm like 99% sure it's going to turn out like the Dricus fight. And here's the reason why. I think that after the Dricus fight, Khamzat has realized that against higher levels of competition that have a higher chance of coming back and finishing him, he can just play it safe. And that's how I see the fight between Khamzat and Imavov turning out. Like, Imavov has better wrestling defense than Dricus, but he was still, getting taken down by Sean Strickland in their fight. He was still getting out-grappled by Brendan Allen, right? Which is not a good look. So, I think that Khamzat is just going to take down Imavov and just lay on him for 5 rounds again. And we just saw Jailton Almeida get cut from the UFC for putting on boring performances like that, right? Like, when you think of Jailton Almeida, you think of the Derek Lewis fight, right? Where he had mount, but he did nothing. He threw no ground and pound, and he just laid on top of him for 5 rounds. That was basically like the Dricus fight that Khamzat had. I mean, Khamzat's fight with Dricus was marginally better because he threw some light ground and pound from Crucifix. But still, it was terribly boring. And as I'll talk about later, none of the other champions, with the possible exception of maybe Islam Makhachev, have that sort of fight style. Like, nobody else in the UFC, no other UFC champion goes out and does that. But those aren't the only reasons why I believe firmly that Khamzat Chimaev is the worst champion that we have right now, okay? Because fight style and fight schedule aside, Khamzat Chimaev, he has, I believe, and actually I think a lot of people would agree, he has the pound-for-pound worst fan base in MMA. And you know who I'm talking about when I'm talking about that fan base, right? We all know who they are. And the thing is that fan base is very loud, right? They're very loud. They're very obnoxious, especially on platforms like Twitter and on Instagram, where they just spam comment sections with, Boars is coming, we're gonna smash you, and they're all like that. And they all vicariously live through these caucus Muslims because they have no good fighters of their own. However, because he has all of these fans, and because of, the Saudi oil money and the Emirati oil money and all of that, and the site fees that the UFC gets to go to the Middle East and all of that, Khamzat Chimaev, there's going to be very, very little pressure on him from the UFC to go and defend his belt more. Precisely because he's already such a big star and such a big name. Like, he's probably like the third or fourth biggest star in the UFC right now. And because of that, he's incredibly overranked in the pound-for-pound rankings. Like, if you look at the pound-for-pound rankings, you have to wonder, how is Volkanovski not above Chimaev? How is Alex Pereira not above Chimaev? Volk and Pereira were multiple-time defending champions who, I guess, they lost the belt, but then they won it back. And in Volkanovski's case, he's already defended the belt. And sure, Chimaev is undefeated, but you also have to remember that Chimaev, he has like 4 wins at middleweight, right? He has Robert Whittaker, he has Kamaru Usman going up a weight class on short notice, and that was Kamaru Usman coming off of 2 losses. And then he has Dricus, of course, that's a great win. And then he has Gerald Meerschaert at middleweight. He has nobody else. Chimaev's resume is one of the thinnest out of all of the champions, minus Joshua Van. And he is still somehow top 3 pound for pound, which is just absurd to me. But he gets this sort of privileged treatment because he is such a big star in that region of the world. And then besides his fan base, there's the fact that Khamzat Chimaev himself is a crypto scammer, and how he's best friends with Ramzan Kadyrov, and all of that. So yes, I do not like Khamzat Chimaev. He's turning out to be exactly what we worried about when he won that belt. At least with Dricus and with Sean Strickland, we got to see the middleweight belt get defended at least like twice a year minimum, right? And with Adesanya, say what you will about him, and I've said a lot, the dog diddler was defending the belt like 3 times a year. And while some of Adesanya's title defenses weren't that great, we got to see great fights like the first Pereira fight, the second Pereira fight, and of course the Strickland upset. We got to see all those great moments. But with Chimaev, it just feels like the middleweight division is just stalled and dead. So yes, Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion, is the #1 worst male champion in the UFC. Now moving on, we have Joshua Van. And now, if you're wondering why I use that sound clip and what it's a reference to, it's this.
My name is Van. I'm 30 years old. I'm an artist. I'm a performance artist. I'm hired for people to fulfill their fantasies, their deep, dark fantasies.
And now you have been traumatized for life. Unless, of course, you were chronically online in the early 2000s, or you're Russian. In which case, you already know about Van Darkholm, Billy Harrington, and all the Gachimuchi guys. But anyways, when it comes to Joshua
Van,
he's a fun champ, and I really do like his fight style, but he's just not my favorite option for champion at flyweight. Because at flyweight, you have Tatsuro Taira, of course, who's probably going to be fighting Joshua
Van
at UFC 327, which, honestly speaking, it's already been leaked, so, cat's out of the bag there. And you've also got Kyoji Horiguchi there, who I not only think will become champion, but given his career and the experience he's had, and the legend he's become, both inside and outside of the UFC, I think sort of deserves the belt, if you get what I mean. I mean, with Kyoji, he already has the sort of aura of a UFC champion. All he's lacking is the belt itself. And then, besides Kyoji and Taira, who I glaze because they're my fellow countrymen, you've also got Manel Cape out there, right? Now, Manel Cape, he's a former Ryzen champion, so that will help me with my own personal agenda of Ryzen chilling. And yes, Manel, he's a little bit unreliable. Yes, he has that issue with the suspiciously oversized mammary gland, despite being a male. But Manel, he's also fun, he's exciting, he's a knockout artist at flyweight, which is very, very rare to see. And then finally, you have Pantoja himself, right? Who
Van
beat, in quotation marks, but I mean, nobody really considers that to be a truly legitimate win. And Pantoja himself is incredibly exciting and fun to watch as well. So yeah, no hate towards
Van,
but when it comes to everybody in the title picture, I personally like everybody else more than I like
Van,
besides the fact that I can make Joshua
Van
memes, okay? Another thing about Joshua
Van,
and this is more of a personal sort of gripe I have with his fight style, is he's incredibly exciting, he's incredibly entertaining, but I just watch him and I just end up wondering, is it okay for a guy who's 23 years old to be taking as much damage as he does? Because I just watch him and he's eating all of these shots when he fights, and it's super fun, but I'm just sitting here thinking, how long is this guy's career going to last if he ends up taking as many shots as he does? And the thing is that we know that Joshua
Van
doesn't have like Max Holloway's chin or Cheeto Vera's chin. Like, he's been knocked out cold before. So I'm just left here wondering, you know, is it all right for Joshua
Van
to be fighting in the way that he does? It's incredibly exciting. It's fun for the fans. But it's just like, for career longevity, is this style sustainable? So it just troubles me personally watching a guy who's, you know, around the same age as me, absorbing the punishment that he does. But besides that, I have no other issues with
Van.
It all just comes down to, in the end, I just like everybody else more. Both the other UFC champions and the other possible flyweight contenders that could hold the 125-pound belt. And now moving on, we have the heavyweight champion, Tom Aspinall. Now, you might be wondering, why do I have Tom Aspinall above Joshua
Van?
And well, the reason why is because, and I'm just going to be frank here, I don't have the memory span of a goldfish. Like, I remember very clearly Tom Aspinall knocking out Sergey Pavlovich, knocking out Curtis Blades, being this incredibly exciting finisher. And I still very clearly remember how John Jones ducked him. However, after the Cyril Gane fight, I have to say that his stock has dropped quite a bit, both among the fans and with myself. And there's a few reasons why. First of all, he just needs to stay off of social media. Like, Tom, you're probably not going to see this video. And actually, even if you don't see this video, you've already been told this quite a lot probably. But you need to stop filming yourself getting eye surgery and posting photos of your bloodied up eyes. Because at this point, everybody already knows what happened, okay? Cyril Gane brutally eye-poked you in the fight, you got very badly injured, and you now need some time off. However, if you keep on posting all these constant updates about your eyeballs to social media, all that's going to do is just get more and more haters saying, oh, he's faking it, he's doing it all to duck Cyril Gane because Gane was piecing him up in that fight. At this point, the people who are going to believe you, myself included, are going to believe you. But your haters, such as the John Jones fans and the French fans, they are going to keep up their narrative. And there's nothing you can do to change their mind besides going back there in the cage and smoking Cyril Gane. And look, I still believe that Tom Aspinall is the best option for heavyweight champion. And look, I don't want Cyril Gane as champion, right? Because he's already lost to Ngannou and he got completely dominated by Jones. So all it just ends up doing is making John Jones look good, which I don't want. And realistically speaking, the only competitive fight for Tom Aspinall at heavyweight is Cyril Gane. There are like a few people who are kind of dumb and stupid who think that Waldo Cortez Acosta has some sort of chance against Tom Aspinall. And these are the people who have the memory of a goldfish because they don't remember Waldo Cortez Acosta getting dominated by the ghost of Sergey Pavlovich, who had his soul snatched by Tom Aspinall in their fight. So yeah, there's no way that fight's competitive. And overall, another reason why I find it difficult to like Aspinall as champion any longer is because the division as a whole is just terrible. There's no exciting matchups for Tom Aspinall besides Cyril Gane and a potential Alex Pereira super fight. And honestly, I'll just say, you know, if Alex Pereira were to move up and fight for the heavyweight championship, I would also be cheering for Alex Pereira in that case because it would be much more cool and hype for Pereira to become champion and become triple champ, which is actually looking more and more likely. And well, I love Tom. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a nice guy. And I loved how exciting he was as a fighter back when, you know, he was finishing all these fights in the first round. But if he can't fight this year, I think he needs to vacate. If Tom Aspinall is not going to be ready to fight Cyril Gane or maybe Alex Pereira, by the end of this year, he's going to have to vacate. Because Look, heavyweight is already a giant mess of a division. There's almost no talent there, and we need a way to fix it. So yes, I love you, Tom Aspinall, but it's becoming harder and harder to love you, and I think that you're doing all of your social media wrong, and if you're going to end up holding up the division, although it's through no fault of your own, I will eventually want you to vacate. And now, moving right along, we have Islam Makhachev. Now, with Islam Makhachev, I first have to say, I did not like the JDM fight. Like, that stuff, that was boring as hell. But with Islam Makhachev, I have to give him credit for how entertaining his lightweight reign was. The Charles Oliveira fight was fun. The first Volkanovski fight is still, in my opinion, one of the greatest fights of all time, especially when it comes to skill level. The second Volk fight, sure, it was Volk on short notice, but still, it was a fantastic finish from Islam. The Poirier fight, that was an all-time classic. And then he went out there and he treated Renato Moicano kind of like a kid, basically. And that was Renato Moicano coming off a win over Benoit Saint-Denis. And we're seeing how good Benoit Saint-Denis is. But with Islam Makhachev as the welterweight champion, I think we're going to see the same amount of activity from Islam, where he'll be fighting about twice a year, and I'm perfectly fine with that. However, I don't have much else to say about Islam because I'm not a massive super fan of him, and I also don't hate him. And I also don't really need to see anybody else in that division become champion over him. Like, he's going to be fighting Ian Gary next, probably. And in this case, I'm going to be cheering for Islam 100% because, God forbid, I see Ian Gary become a UFC champion. Like, he will be incredibly obnoxious, and I won't be able to deal with it. You know, gloating about how he destroyed Shavkat's knee and might have potentially ruined his career. Like, that just strikes me the wrong way. And I've even made an entire video about, Ian Gary and how big of a hypocrite he is when it comes to stuff like family matters. And when you add on top of that, the fact that his fights aren't that entertaining. So yeah, I'm going to be supporting Islam Makhachev if, or rather when that fight happens. Another thing that warrants mentioning when it comes to Islam Makhachev and his legacy is that I think he's really started to emerge from Khabib's shadow. Because if you remember how Islam Makhachev was treated prior to his fight with Charles Oliveira especially, he was basically just the second coming of Khabib. But now, I think that most fans recognize that Islam Makhachev has achieved a legacy that far surpasses Khabib. Like, I think that Islam Makhachev, he's probably top 3 or maybe even top 2 all time. Like, he's up there with DJ and GSP. Like, he's in that mix. And that sort of greatness just has to be respected. So yes, Islam Makhachev, I'm not a huge fan, I'm not a massive hater, and I think there's no disputing his greatness. And on top of that, he's pretty funny, with memes like, send 2 or 3 years Dagestan and forget, brother, or black belt, who give him that. For a fighter from the Caucasus, he has a fantastic sense of humor. And next, moving on, we have Ilia Topuria. Ilia Abturo. And with Ilia, well, I first have to say, he is by far the most exciting champion on the roster. I mean, with Ilia, you're basically guaranteed to see a highlight reel finish in the main event. So he's always great to watch. Ilia Topuria, in the UFC, has never had a bad fight. I mean, even his debut fight against Yusuf Zalal, sure, that was a little bit grappling and wrestling heavy, but it was still fun and high level and all of that. And while he did have the issues surrounding his ex-wife from Miami, and the kids, and the house, and all those legal issues that were keeping him from fighting, he's now coming back to fight Justin Gaethje, likely at the White House, and after he beats Justin Gaethje, he can then fight Arman Tsarukyan. The fight against Arman Tsarukyan is what we need to see, and I think we will be seeing it this year. I also tend to find Ilia Topuria's style to be quite fascinating to watch, because if you've noticed this, he doesn't kick above the waist. He only throws calf kicks and low kicks, and he doesn't even throw, inside low kicks or anything like that. And with this quite limited toolbox of just boxing and low kicks, he's become one of the greatest strikers in the UFC, and honestly, maybe even in UFC history. So from a technical perspective, he's quite interesting to watch as well. And when it comes to his personality, he's very, very corny, right? With the rose and trying to look all cool and all of that. But he ends up coming off a little bit cringe. And a lot of the times when he ends up trying to come off cool or hip, he ends up coming off in a very cringe way. And a great example of this is when he hung out with the Nelk Boys and he talked about how his then wife, his now ex-wife, was from the streets of Miami or some club in Miami. And they were like, why are you wifing up a Miami girl, bro? And, you know, he kind of had to like play it off. And then in the end, it still came back to bite him in the ass. Like, I thought that was hilarious in a bit of a dark way. And then now you have all of these memes about how Ilia Topuria is going to take out his anger and vengeance on Justin Gaethje and sacrifice him to Ball on the White House lawn. Like, I think that stuff's hilarious. But yeah, Ilia Topuria, very exciting. Honestly, he's kind of interchangeable with Islam Makhachev for me when it comes to the ranking of how much I like the champions right now. Actually, I would say that I do like Ilia Topuria more because he is funnier, he is more exciting, but it's still close. I'll say that. But yeah, that's Ilia Topuria. Now moving on up, we have Alex Poatan Pereira. Now for me, I think that Alex Pereira, when he delivers, he really, really, truly does deliver. Right? Like, I love the Khalil Roundtree fight. I loved both the first and second Yuri fights, although they broke my heart because I love Yuri. And for me, Alex Pereira is the guy who keeps on delivering when it comes to decimating fighters with terrible fan bases. You know, like Israel Adesanya and Magomed Ankalaev. Like, I'm pretty sure Alex Pereira has made Kenny Okoye cry twice, which makes me quite happy. And then you add on top of that the potential that Alex Pereira has so late on into his career. Like, Alex Pereira, he's basically cleaned out light heavyweight. All that's left for him at light heavyweight is Carlos Solberg. And if the rumors are true, Carlos Solberg is probably going to be fighting Yuri Prochazka at UFC 227 or maybe UFC 228 for either the interim or the vacant light heavyweight title. And Alex is probably going to be moving up to face Cyril Gane for the interim heavyweight title, or maybe even the vacant undisputed heavyweight title if Tom Aspinall is forced to vacate. So Pereira has the potential right now to achieve a great deal, an enormous accomplishment, and he's like 40 years old, and he's had an entire career of like kickboxing fights as well as many MMA fights now at this point. Like, he's not just a kickboxer in MMA anymore. He is a full-on fledged MMA fighter with many legendary bouts under his belt. And watching Alex become the first triple champion in MMA after coming to the sport at such a late age would be really, really special, which is something that genuinely gets me really, really excited. And on top of that, while I do miss the old and stoic and sort of mysterious Alex Pereira that was kind of his persona during the Izzy fights, I also really like Happy Poatan, who's, you know, he's always at a Brazilian barbecue, he's always training with like a bunch of happy people. He just seems like a genuinely nice person who is a great father to his kids and all of that. He just seems like a genuinely great person to be around and also a great mentor as well, because he's also helping to train up the next generation of fighters. You know, he's training his own two sons in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA by working with Glover Teixeira and his own coach Plinio Cruz. And also, he's currently helping the rising heavyweight King Otapolo, who's this like 7-foot tall guy who I personally believe is going to be the next big heavyweight prospect. Like, Alex Pereira has given so much to MMA in such a short period of time. He headlined UFC 300, he saved UFC 303 and UFC 308 on pretty short notice. And it's not just like he saved those events by making sure that there was a big name headlining them. He put on spectacular performances in both of those title fights. And I mean, that's why he's a fan favorite. He has a bunch of highlight reel KOs, he's super entertaining to watch. He has that storyline where he used to work at a tire shop in the favelas, took up kickboxing at the age of 22 to help curb his alcohol addiction, went on to beat Israel Adesanya in kickboxing, and then used that rivalry to end up becoming UFC middleweight champion, lost the belt then afterwards in the rematch, and then went on to achieve what Israel Adesanya couldn't by becoming light heavyweight champion, by beating Jan Blachowicz and Yuri Prochazka. And now he might become the heavyweight champion of the world this year, which to me, that's like, he has like the greatest storybook career in UFC history maybe. And honestly, I can see Alex Pereira headlining anybody's list when it comes to their favorite champion in the UFC. It's just that me personally, I've got two other guys who just rank slightly higher than Pereira for me. And you'll understand why when I get to them. And now moving on to my second favorite UFC champion right now, it is Alexander the Great Volkanovski. Now, I can gush about Volk for hours, and it was really difficult deciding between him and the guy I have in first place, because Volkanovski is a fighter and a champion who has a special place in my heart. And I mean, he's been a part of so many memorable fights. There was the Max Holloway trilogy, where he won the belt dominantly in the first fight, arguably lost the rematch and had everybody calling him a paper champ and doubting him, and then came back in the third fight and just proved all of his doubters wrong. There's the Brian Ortega fight where he survived that super tight guillotine and super tight triangle. And of course, as I said in that segment about Islam Makhachev, the first Volk versus Islam fight is probably the highest skilled level bout in MMA history. And then how he lost the belt to Topuria, but then came back and schooled Diego Lopez to reclaim his throne. Volkanovski's story as a champion is just so beautiful in many ways. And that's what makes me really, really like him. His fight style is also pretty damn entertaining, especially when he gets into that flow state when he's popping his opponent with a jab, he's darting in and out, he's finding his range, he's countering with the right hand, he's doing all that. And on top of that, he's a fantastic grappler and anti-wrestler as well. And I mean, he did better than JDM, who's a welterweight, while being a pretty short featherweight against Islam Makhachev. You know, at least in the first fight, right? And also, I have to give him props for being one of the few fighters who's actually, you know, building his own brand outside of fighting, which I think is very, very important, because you can't be a fighter and fight forever, right? You have to sort of build yourself outside of MMA. And he's already doing that while being a champion by doing the whole Cooking with Volk series. And I mean, I know people who know about Cooking with Volk who don't know that he's a UFC champion. So he's making a lot of smart career moves there. And I mean, it's just really, really nice to see a guy coming back at 37 years of age from the sort of slump that he was on with the 2 back-to-back KO losses that he had against Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. Because, like, I remember, and I was one of the people who thought that he was completely done. That, yeah, like, I thought he was done, man. Like, he was done. I can't do the impression well. But I thought it was over for him when he lost to Topuria. I thought that his chin was gone. But it turns out that, you know, Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria are just generational talents. And Volk is still one of the best in the UFC and of all time. Like, he's probably top 5 of all time. Especially after beating Diego Lopez in the rematch. Like, I would agree with Lucas Tracy's assessment on that. But anyways, before we get to the number 1 spot, I have to give a shout out to my favorite women's MMA fighter. And that is Kayla Harrison. You know, Muscle Mommy Kayla. Kayla Harrison, as MMA Guru likes to do the impression. But you know, contrary to how Kayla Harrison looks and how she fights in the cage, she's probably like the best, most genuine person on the UFC roster right now. She seems like a great mother to her adopted children. She seems to be a great teammate. And on top of all that, she actually wants to fight the best fighter in her division, which is Amanda Nunes. Which is more than can be said of Khamzat Chimaev and Islam Makhachev, with Khamzat wanting to fight Alex Pereira up at light heavyweight despite not having defended the belt once, and Islam Makhachev calling for Kamaru Usman. So yeah, respect to Kayla Harrison for actually wanting the toughest challenge that the UFC has to offer. And if Kayla Harrison beats Amanda Nunes, I think that firmly establishes her as the greatest female combat sports athlete of all time. She's an Olympic gold medalist in judo, she's a former PFL champion, and she'll be a 2-time defending UFC champion with a win over the arguable GOAT of women's MMA. And really, there wouldn't be any fights left for Kayla after beating Amanda Nunes, because we would just know that Kayla dominates everybody else. I mean, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to throw Shevchenko at her? Shevchenko would get dwarfed by Kayla. And another reason why I have to respect Kayla Harrison is because she probably has the hardest weight cut in the UFC right now. I mean, she's enormous. She's huge for bantamweight. But she still toughs it out. And she always makes weight, which to me, like, I have to respect that so much because I know how tough that must be. Like, she's a featherweight. She's a women's featherweight, but she's cutting all the way down to make bantamweight because there's only a bantamweight championship left, you know? So yes, Kayla Harrison, you are my favorite women's MMA fighter. And that's by far. Like, I like her much more than Zhang Weili, than Valentina, maybe even more than Dakota Jisheva. But that's because Dakota is still in the PFL, and she's still sort of an unknown entity in the UFC. We just don't know how good she is. She's definitely good, but we don't know how good just yet. And now finally, we have my favorite UFC champion. And that is Pyotr Pookie Bear No Mercy Yan. And the reason why I love Yan, it's not because of his personality, it's not because of some sort of external characteristic or because, I relate to him personally or anything like that. I just love watching Pyotr Yan fight. And I remember when Pyotr Yan became not just my favorite bantamweight, but probably one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. And that was watching Pyotr Yan versus Davison Figueiredo for the UFC Shanghai event in 2024. I remember that fight vividly. And I've watched it over and over again multiple times because, for me at least, that was my fight of the year for 2024. Because that fight had everything. That fight had striking, grappling, wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu, all of it mixed together. It was an actual display of mixed martial arts. Like, I can understand people liking to watch fights like Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van, where it's just two guys scrapping with each other in 4-ounce MMA gloves. Like, I can understand the appeal of that. And I can understand the appeal of a fight like Arman Tsarukyan versus Mateusz Gamrot, where it's these very, very high-level scrambles. But there's no other fighter in the UFC that puts it all together in such a beautiful way like Pyotr Yan does. And look, I'm a massive fan of Merab as well. However, it's because of how big a fan of Merab I am that I'm glad that Pyotr beat him in the way that he did. And let me explain what I mean by that. Now, if you guys just think back a few months, back when Merab was champion, everybody was saying, well, he's the greatest bantamweight of all time. I think Merab still has a solid argument for being the greatest bantamweight of all time, despite losing to Pyotr Yan. But people were saying, oh, the only way to beat Merab is to sort of fluke KO him. You have to flying knee him, or you need to time him perfectly when he's coming in. But no, Pyotr Yan systematically dismantled Merab Dvalishvili. I mean, there were so many little tricks and ways of fighting that Pyotr Yan demonstrated in that fight that just made me think, like, this guy's a fucking genius. When Merab went for the body lock, Pyotr Yan didn't just try to fight the hands like you would in normal jiu-jitsu. No, he elbowed Merab's forearms to break Merab's grip. Everybody talks about Merab's cardio and his endless gas tank and how he's this machine. He's literally called the machine. What do you do to stop a car from moving? You attack the engine. Yes, you don't go for the head against Merab. Pyotr Yan made sure to attack Merab's body. He shut the machine down. He destroyed that infinite engine that is Merab's gas tank. And that's how he beat him. And that's why I'm so glad that Pyotr Yan beat Merab in the way that he did. He didn't knock Merab out. He didn't fluke him or anything like that. No, he systematically dismantled Merab. He was up against this crazy physical force that is Merab and used skill, fight IQ, and technique to break him down. And to me, that is what a true mixed martial artist does, okay? When I see Pyotr Yan, I see not just a boxer, because a lot of people tend to regard Pyotr Yan as this boxer, or maybe as like a Muay Thai guy. He's not just a striker or anything like that. Pyotr Yan is a mixed martial artist in the truest sense of the word. He mixes everything so well. And he understands how striking transitions into grappling, how grappling transitions into striking, how to throw ground and pound, how to defend submissions. He knows how to do all of that. And that is why Pyotr Yan is my favorite champion. He is what a true mixed martial artist should be. And that is why Pyotr Yan is my favorite. Anyways, that's the video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please comment your favorite champions down below, especially if you disagree with me on anything. And anyways, goodbye.